The pounding on my door pulled me from sleep like a hand dragging me underwater. My eyes snapped open to darkness. The red numbers on my alarm clock glowed 5:03 a.m. My heart hammered as I stumbled out of bed, grabbing my phone as a weapon. Through the peephole, I saw Daniel standing on my porch. My neighbor. The quiet guy who lived next door and worked from home doing something with computers. He was barefoot, wearing sweatpants and a wrinkled t-shirt. His hands were shaking. I opened the door a crack. "Daniel, what's wrong?" His eyes darted past me, then to the street like he expected someone to jump out of the shadows. "Maren, don't go to work today." "What are you talking about? Just trust me. Stay home. Please." His voice cracked on the last word. Before I could ask anything else, he turned and walked quickly back to his house, disappearing inside. I stood there in my doorway, cold air biting my skin, completely confused. What just happened? My name is Maren Ellis, and I'm 32 years old. Until that bizarre morning, my biggest problem was surviving another day at Brenner & Company, the high-end real estate marketing firm where I'd worked for 5 years. I was the reliable one. The invisible one. The person who stayed late fixing everyone else's mistakes while they went home to their lives. I created campaigns that brought in millions, but my name never appeared on the presentations. I was exhausted all the time, running on coffee and the hope that someday someone would notice. My apartment was small but mine. I decorated it carefully with plants and books, creating a space that felt safe. Daniel had moved in next door about 8 months ago. We'd exchange polite hellos when getting mail or taking out trash. He seemed nice enough, always dressed casually, always carrying his laptop bag. I knew he worked in cybersecurity because he'd mentioned it once when helping me reset my router. That was the extent of our friendship. Neighborly but distant. So having him show up at my door before dawn, terrified and cryptic, made absolutely no sense. I tried going back to sleep, but my mind wouldn't stop spinning. Why would Daniel tell me not to go to work? Was there a gas leak? A threat he'd heard about? My thoughts went to darker places. Was he dangerous? Had I misjudged him completely? By 6:30 I gave up on sleep and made coffee. My hands were still shaking slightly as I poured it. I kept replaying his face, the fear in his eyes, the way he'd looked over his shoulder. My phone buzzed with the usual morning messages. A text from my boss, Hal Brenner, reminding everyone about the 9 o'clock client meeting. The one I'd spent 6 months preparing for. My stomach twisted. I couldn't just skip work because my weird neighbor told me to. That was insane. I had responsibilities. Presentation to deliver. A career that was barely hanging on as it was. But something about Daniel's voice kept echoing in my head. The desperation. "Please." I stood at my window, coffee cup warming my palms, watching the sun rise over the street. Daniel's curtains were closed. No movement. What did he know? Hal Brenner was the kind of boss who made you feel small without ever raising his voice. He wore expensive suits that fit perfectly, smiled like a politician, and ran meetings like performances. He could charm investors into anything, then turn around and humiliate his staff in the same breath. He'd built Brenner & Company from nothing into one of the city's top real estate marketing firms. Luxury condos, commercial developments, high-rise apartments. If it was expensive and needed selling, we handled it. And by we, I mean I did most of the actual work while Hal took credit. He had this way of calling me his secret weapon when it suited him, usually when he needed something done overnight. The rest of the time I was just another employee. Replaceable. Forgettable. I'd learned to swallow my frustration. This job paid my rent. It looked good on my resume. And sometimes late at night when I was alone with my work, I actually enjoyed the creative challenge of it. But lately something had shifted. Hal had become distant. Meetings happened without me. Emails went unanswered. I told myself it was just busy season, but deep down I knew better. Then there was Tessa Reed. 25 years old. All glossy hair and calculated ambition. Her official title was executive assistant, But everyone knew what she really was. Hal had introduced her to the team 6 months ago, calling her the creative heart of our operation. I'd felt my jaw clench so hard my teeth hurt. Tessa was smart, I'd give her that. She knew how to laugh at Hal's jokes, how to touch his arm at exactly the right moment, how to make herself indispensable. She wore designer clothes on an assistant's salary and somehow always had the perfect comment in meetings. The worst part. She was good at her job. Not as good as me, but good enough that Hal could pretend she was. 3 weeks ago we'd had a major client meeting. I'd spent 6 months developing the entire campaign for a downtown luxury development. Market analysis, target demographics, creative concepts, media strategy. Everything. I stood at the front of the conference room, presenting my work to a table full of investors. Halfway through, Hal interrupted me. Actually, Tessa led this concept, he said smoothly. Marin helped with execution, but the vision was all Tessa's. The investors nodded approvingly at Tessa, who smiled modestly. I felt my pulse pounding in my ears. After the meeting, I'd cornered Hal in his office. My hands were shaking with anger, but I kept my voice level. That was my work. 6 months of research and development. Why would you tell them it was Tessa's? Hal leaned back in his leather chair, that familiar smile spreading across his face. The one that said I was being unreasonable. Come on, Marin. You're not mad, right? You're a team player. I am a team player, but that doesn't mean I should be erased from my own projects. He sighed like I was exhausting him. The clients liked her. Sometimes it's about optics. You understand. I didn't understand. But I forced a smile anyway. Of course. Good. I knew I could count on you. As I walked out of his office, something inside me broke cleanly in half. The part of me that believed hard work mattered. The part that thought fairness existed in corporate America. The part that still hoped Hal would do the right thing. That part died right there in the hallway, and I didn't even have time to mourn it. That night, I stayed late finishing edits everyone else had forgotten about. The office was empty except for the hum of computers and the city lights glowing through the windows. Tessa's perfume still lingered in the air, expensive and overwhelming. Hal's coffee mug sat on my draft papers, leaving a ring stain on 6 months of work. I stared at my computer screen until the words blurred. My reflection in the monitor looked hollow. Dark circles under my eyes. Hair pulled back messily. When had I started looking so tired? My phone buzzed with a text from my college roommate asking if I wanted to grab dinner sometime. I realized I couldn't remember the last time I'd said yes to anything social. My entire life had shrunk down to this office, this job, this suffocating routine. I closed my laptop at 11:30 and walked to my car through the empty parking garage. My footsteps echoed off concrete. Somewhere above me, a fluorescent light flickered. I drove home in silence, too exhausted even for music. Tomorrow would be the same. And the day after. And the day after that. Unless something changed. 2 weeks before Daniel knocked on my door, I'd stayed late backing up files. Standard procedure before major presentations. I was clicking through folders when I noticed something odd. Invoices with my digital signature. Ones I didn't remember approving. I opened them, frowning. They were payment authorizations for consulting fees, routing money to offshore accounts I'd never heard of. Amounts in the hundreds of thousands. All dated within the last 3 months. My stomach dropped. I definitely hadn't approved these. But there was my signature, my employee ID number, my authorization code. I took screenshots, my hands shaking slightly. This felt wrong. Really wrong. But I didn't know what to do with the information. Confront Hal. Report it to HR. What if I was misunderstanding something? I saved everything to a personal folder and tried to convince myself there was a reasonable explanation. There wasn't. Over the next week, I noticed more irregularities. Payments to shell companies. Transfers approved during hours I wasn't even in the office. My name attached to documents I'd never seen. Someone was using my credentials to move money. And I had a sinking feeling I knew who. The warning signs came quickly after that. Hal started avoiding me completely. He'd see me in the hallway and suddenly remember an urgent phone call. Meetings were rescheduled without me. Emails went unanswered for days. Tessa became distant too. The fake friendliness disappeared, replaced by cold efficiency. She'd brush past me without speaking, always on her phone, always busy. Conversations stopped when I entered rooms. I'd walk into the break room and find co-workers suddenly fascinated by their coffee. The silence was thick and uncomfortable, heavy with things no one wanted to say. One afternoon, Bailey from accounting pulled me aside. She was younger than me, always wore bright scarves and had kind eyes. "Marin, be careful," she whispered, glancing around nervously. "What do you mean?" "I don't know exactly. But I've heard things. About restructuring. About someone taking the fall for financial issues." She squeezed my arm. "Just watch your back." I tried to laugh it off. "You're being paranoid." But my laugh sounded hollow even to me. That night I couldn't eat dinner. I sat on my couch staring at my laptop, wondering if I should start looking for a new job. Wondering if it was already too late. The following Monday, Hal called an all-staff meeting. Everyone crammed into the main conference room, confused and anxious. Hal stood at the front, Tessa beside him, both wearing serious expressions. "We're launching a new compliance initiative," Hal announced. "We've grown rapidly, and we need better oversight of our financial systems." People nodded. Sounded reasonable. Tessa will be heading up the new compliance team as acting director. She'll be reviewing all major expenditures and authorizations from the past year. My blood went cold. Reviewing authorizations. The same authorizations with my forged signature. After the meeting, I tried to catch Hal alone, but he disappeared into his office. I knocked. No answer. I could see his shadow moving behind the frosted glass, but he wouldn't open the door. That afternoon, I noticed my title had been removed from the internal staff directory. No announcement. No explanation. Just gone. I sat at my desk, staring at the blank space where my name used to be, and felt the walls closing in. Coworker named Adrian stopped by my desk. "You okay?" "Fine," I lied. He lowered his voice. "You're being set up. Everyone can see it." I laughed nervously. "That's crazy." But we both knew it wasn't. Daniel worked from home. I knew this because I'd see him through his window sometimes, sitting at his desk with multiple monitors glowing in the dark. He kept odd hours, often working late into the night. We weren't friends, but we were friendly. The kind of neighbors who'd accept packages for each other or share warnings about parking enforcement. He seemed nice, quiet, a little awkward but harmless. What I didn't know was that Daniel worked in corporate cybersecurity. Specifically, he tracked financial fraud patterns for companies investigating internal theft. And what I really didn't know was that for the past 3 weeks, he'd been noticing something strange on our shared network connection. Late one night, while running routine security checks, Daniel noticed unusual data traffic. It was coming from my apartment, but the patterns were wrong. File access timestamps that didn't match normal usage. Remote logins during hours when my apartment was clearly dark and empty. He tried to ignore it. It wasn't his business. But the cybersecurity part of his brain couldn't let it go. So he dug deeper. What he found made him not sleep for 2 days straight. Someone was using my credentials to access Brenner and Company's financial systems remotely. Transferring money. Hiding transactions. Building a digital trail that led straight back to me. And the IP address it was really coming from. Hal Brenner's home office. Daniel stared at his screen. His coffee going cold beside him. It was 3 a.m. He'd been tracing data packets for hours, following the digital breadcrumbs through proxy servers and VPN tunnels. Every piece of evidence pointed to the same conclusion. Someone was framing me for financial fraud. They were using sophisticated techniques, hiding their tracks carefully. But they'd made one mistake. They'd underestimated the security protocols on our building's network. Every connection left a fingerprint, And Daniel knew how to read them. He pulled up the authorization logs I'd been unknowingly implicated in. Money flowing to offshore accounts. Payments to shell companies that didn't exist. All approved with my digital signature during hours when network logs showed I was definitely not online. But someone else was. Someone accessing the system remotely from an IP address registered to Hal Brenner. Daniel sat back, running his hands through his hair. This was bad. Really bad. And based on the patterns he was seeing, it was about to get worse. He looked at the clock. 4:47 a.m. In a few hours I'd wake up and go to work like normal. And whatever was being planned would happen. He grabbed his keys and ran next door. I stood in my kitchen, coffee going cold in my hand, staring at my phone. I'd already called in sick. My voice had sounded strange when I talked to the office manager. Shaky. Uncertain. "Are you sure you're okay?" she'd asked. "Just a stomach bug. I'll be fine tomorrow." After I hung up, I sat on my couch, heart racing. What was I doing? Skipping work because my neighbor had a panic attack at my door? This was insane. I should go in. Explain I made a mistake. Show up for the client meeting. But I kept seeing Daniel's face. The terror in his eyes. The way his hands shook. "Just trust me." My phone buzzed constantly. Messages from coworkers asking where I was. An email from Hal marked urgent. A text from Tessa saying we needed to talk. I ignored all of them. At 11:30, I was pacing my apartment, second-guessing everything. I probably just ruined my career over nothing. Daniel was probably just having a mental health crisis. I should apologize to everyone and go in tomorrow. Then, at exactly noon, my phone lit up with a news alert. Picked it up, frowning. Then I read the headline. My coffee cup slipped from my hand and shattered on the floor. Breaking Brenner and Company. Executives detained in fraud investigation. I couldn't breathe. I read the article 3 times, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold my phone. Federal agents had raided Brenner and Company that morning. Hal Brenner and 3 other executives were in custody. The company was under investigation for systematic financial fraud, money laundering, and wire fraud stretching back 18 months. Estimated losses. Over $4 million. I scrolled down, my vision tunneling. Then I saw it. List of names. Employees under review for their potential involvement. Third name on the list. Maren Ellis, senior strategist. The phone fell from my hands. I stood frozen in my living room, pieces of my broken coffee cup scattered around my feet, unable to process what I was reading. They were saying I was involved. Name. On the news. Connected to fraud. This couldn't be happening. My phone exploded with notifications. Texts from friends. "Are you okay? What's going on? Is this real?" An email from my mom. "Maren, I just saw the news. Call me immediately." I sank onto my couch, pulling my knees to my chest. They were framing me. This whole thing had been planned. The forged invoices. The compliance team. Removing my title from the directory. They'd been building a case against me, creating a paper trail that made me look guilty. And I'd almost walked right into it. The next hour was a blur. I tried calling Brenner and Company, but the main line went straight to voicemail. I tried Hal's cell. Disconnected. I even tried Tessa. Nothing. My inbox flooded with emails. Most were from coworkers expressing shock or asking questions I couldn't answer. A few were from journalists requesting interviews. One was from HR, instructing me not to discuss the case with anyone. But the worst email was from the company's law firm. It was formal and cold, informing me that I was suspended pending the outcome of the investigation. It mentioned cooperation, legal counsel, and potential criminal charges. Criminal charges. I felt like I might throw up. My doorbell rang. I jumped, heart hammering. Through the peephole, I saw Daniel standing there, looking exhausted. "Open the door." "You stayed home," he said quietly. "How did you know? What's happening? Can I come in?" I stepped aside and he entered, closing the door carefully behind him. He looked at the broken cup on my floor, the news still pulled up on my phone, and nodded slowly. You saw. Daniel, what is going on? How did you know? He took a deep breath. I work in cybersecurity. Financial fraud detection, specifically. I noticed unusual activity on our network 3 weeks ago. I traced it. Traced what? Your credentials being used to authorize fraudulent transfers. But you weren't the one doing it. We sat at my kitchen table, my laptop between us. Daniel pulled up files and showed me things I didn't understand. Server logs. IP addresses. Network timestamps. See this? He pointed at a column of numbers. These are authorizations made with your login. But look at the timestamp and compare it to the network activity from your apartment. Look. The times didn't match. When the authorizations were made, my apartment's network showed no activity. Someone was accessing the system remotely using your credentials, Daniel explained. They were careful, using VPNs and proxy servers. But every connection leaves a trace. He showed me more. Hours of work he'd clearly lost sleep over. Each piece of evidence carefully documented. The IP address, everything routes back to belongs to Hal Brenner's home network. He was using your credentials to move money, then building a case to blame you when the fraud was discovered. Felt numb. Why are you helping me? Daniel looked uncomfortable. Because I saw what was happening and I couldn't just let you walk into it. That's why I came to your door this morning. I knew they were planning to make their move today. How did you know? I saw the federal subpoena requests in their system last night. They were coming today at 9 a.m. If you'd been at the office, you'd have been detained with everyone else. My hands were shaking. What do I do now? Those screenshots you took. Do you still have them? I nodded slowly. How did you? I saw you accessing those files. I've been monitoring the network activity. He looked apologetic. I know that sounds invasive, but I was trying to understand what was happening. I pulled up my personal folder and showed him everything I'd saved. The forged invoices, the unauthorized transfers, all with my signature attached. Daniel studied them carefully. This is good. Really good. The metadata will show when you actually accessed these files versus when the fraudulent activity occurred. This proves you were investigating, not participating. He looked at me seriously. Marin, you need to contact the investigators today. And you need to give them everything. By 5 p.m. I was sitting in a federal office downtown, my laptop and all my backup files spread across a conference table. 2 agents sat across from me. One was older, with gray hair and kind eyes. The other was younger, taking notes. Thank you for coming in voluntarily, Ms. Ellis, the older agent said. I want to help, I replied, my voice surprisingly steady. I've been documenting irregularities for weeks. I walked them through everything. The forged signatures, the offshore accounts, the suspicious timing of the compliance team announcement. I showed them my screenshots, complete with metadata timestamps. You saved all of this? The younger agent asked. I'm thorough, I said. It's kind of my job. The older agent smiled slightly. The metadata here is going to be very helpful. It clearly shows you accessing these files after the transactions occurred. You were investigating, not authorizing. They asked questions for 2 hours. I answered everything honestly, showing them correspondence, internal memos, anything that might help. When we finished, the older agent leaned back in his chair. Ms. Ellis, I want you to know that your cooperation today has been extremely valuable. You've helped us understand the structure of this fraud much more clearly. Am I in trouble? Based on what you've shown us? Well, you're a witness, not a suspect. We'll need you available for additional questions, but you're not being charged with anything. I felt tears prick my eyes. Thank you. As I left the federal building, I called Daniel. How did it go? He asked. They believed me. I think I'm going to be okay. I could hear his relief through the phone. Good. That's really good, Marin. Hal held a press conference that evening. I watched it from my couch, a glass of wine shaking in my hand. He stood outside his lawyer's office, microphones thrust in his face, looking tired but defiant. Tessa stood slightly behind him, her expression blank. "These allegations are completely false," Hal said smoothly. "Brenner and Company has always operated with integrity. However, we've recently discovered that certain staff members may have acted independently to defraud the company and our clients." A reporter shouted, "Can you name those staff members?" Hal's lawyer stepped forward. "We're cooperating fully with the investigation. But we believe the evidence will show that rogue employees, acting without authorization, orchestrated this fraud." Another reporter, "Is Maren Ellis one of those employees?" My stomach clenched. Hal's expression shifted to something like regret. "I don't want to name anyone specifically, but we trusted people who betrayed that trust. It's devastating." The cameras flashed. Tessa stood silent beside him, her hands clasped in front of her, looking down. I turned off the television, fury burning in my chest. He was still lying, still manipulating, still trying to make himself the victim. My phone buzzed. It was Daniel. "Don't watch the news. It doesn't matter what he says. The evidence speaks for itself." But it did matter. Because right now, the whole world believed Hal's version of the story. I just had to trust that the truth would win. What I didn't know was that Daniel was already working on making sure it would. That night, while I tried to sleep, Daniel sat at his computer, carefully preparing a package of evidence. Not for social media or the press. For the investigators. He compiled everything he'd discovered. The IP address trails. The network logs showing when my credentials were actually used versus when I was logged in. The pattern analysis proving the fraud originated from Hal's home office. The timestamps that exonerated me completely. He created a detailed technical report, explaining everything in language investigators could understand. He redacted anything that might compromise my privacy or the ongoing investigation. Then he uploaded it to the federal tip line, anonymously. Every piece traced back to Hal's account authorizations. Every single transaction could be linked directly to him, not me. Daniel had spent weeks building this case, not for recognition or reward, just because it was the right thing to do. At 3 a.m., he finally shut his laptop and tried to sleep. By morning, the investigators had reviewed his submission and were already following up on the leads. The truth was coming. Slowly, carefully, but inevitably. 2 days later, I got a phone call from the lead investigator. "Ms. Ellis, we'd like you to come in again. We have some follow-up questions." My stomach dropped. Am I in trouble? No, actually. Quite the opposite. Some new evidence has come to light that corroborates everything you told us. We want to walk you through it and get your input. At the federal office, they showed me everything. Network logs I didn't understand, but that apparently proved I couldn't have made the unauthorized transfers. Technical reports showing the fraud originated from Hal's IP address. Pattern analysis demonstrating systematic theft over 18 months. "How did you get all this?" he asked. The investigator smiled slightly. "Anonymous tip. Very thorough. Whoever submitted it knows their stuff." I thought of Daniel, sitting alone at his computer in the middle of the night, fighting for someone he barely knew. "Ms. Ellis, I want to be clear," the investigator continued. "You're not under investigation. You're a witness and, frankly, a victim. Your cooperation has been invaluable. You helped us connect the dots on a complex fraud scheme." Relief and anger mixed in my chest. Relief that I was clear. Anger at how close I'd come to losing everything. What happens now? We continue building the case against Mr. Brenner and his associates. You'll likely be called to testify. But you're on the right side of this. As I left, I felt lighter than I had in weeks. The nightmare wasn't over, but at least I could see the end of it. The dam broke 3 days later. Tessa, facing pressure from investigators and the weight of potential charges, decided to cooperate. She hired her own lawyer and made a deal. The news broke in the evening. Former executive assistant provides evidence against Brenner and Company. Yo. According to reports, Tessa had given investigators detailed information about how Hal orchestrated the fraud, how he'd used my credentials, how he'd planned to make me the scapegoat from the beginning, how he'd convinced her to help by promising her a future with the company. She'd kept records, text messages, emails, recorded conversations. She admitted that Hal forged my signatures and used her login to access files, creating a false trail that implicated both of us while protecting himself. She named me specifically as an unwitting scapegoat, someone Hal had deliberately set up. The headlines shifted overnight. Whistleblower clears colleague's name. Brenner and Company. CEO allegedly framed employee. My phone exploded again, but this time the messages were different. I knew you didn't do it. I'm so sorry we doubted you. You must be so relieved. I sat in my apartment reading the articles, feeling vindicated but also empty. This whole nightmare could have been avoided if people had just believed me from the start. Daniel texted. Truth always wins. Just takes time. I smiled for the first time in days. The arrest happened on a Thursday morning. I didn't witness it personally, but everyone who did told me about it. Hal was led out of his office in handcuffs, federal agents on either side. News cameras were already there, someone having tipped off the media. The footage played on every channel. Hal kept his head down, his expensive suit looking rumpled. His lawyer walked beside him, shouting no comment at every question. Employees gathered in the windows, watching their boss become a criminal. Tessa had disappeared from the city overnight. Rumors said she'd relocated to stay with family in another state, trying to rebuild her life away from the scandal. I watched the footage from my couch, Daniel sitting beside me with takeout containers between us. How do you feel? He asked. I don't know, I admitted. Relieved. Angry. Sad kind of. I spent 5 years of my life at that company. You'll find something better. How do you know? He smiled. Because you're good at what you do. And now everyone knows you're honest too. That's rare. I looked at this man who'd barely known me but had fought for me anyway. Thank you. For everything. You saved my life. I just did what anyone would do. No, I said firmly. You did what good people do. There's a difference. 6 weeks later, I sat in a courtroom, my hands folded calmly in my lap. The preliminary hearing was formal and cold. Hal sat across the aisle with his legal team, wearing a different expensive suit. When I was called to testify, I walked to the stand with my head high. Practice this. I was ready. The prosecutor asked me to describe my employment at Brenner and Company. I did calmly and clearly. I explained how I'd discovered the fraudulent invoices, how I'd documented everything, how I'd noticed my credentials being misused. Hal's lawyer tried to rattle me during cross-examination. Isn't it true you had access to all the accounts in question? Yes, as part of my job. And isn't it possible you authorized these transfers and simply don't remember? No. The timestamps prove I wasn't logged into the system when the transfers occurred. But you could have used a remote login. I could have. But I didn't. The IP address logs prove that. The lawyer paused, flipping through notes. I'd answered every trap he'd set. Across the courtroom, Hal glared at me. It was the same glare he'd used in meetings when I questioned his decisions. The look that used to make me shrink. I held his gaze steadily. I didn't look away. Not anymore. 3 months after that terrible morning when Daniel knocked on my door, I signed the lease on a small office space downtown. It wasn't much. Just 2 rooms and a shared reception area. But it was mine. The sign on the door read, Ellis Consulting, Marketing Strategy and Brand Development. I'd used my savings and a small business loan to start my own consulting firm. Daniel had helped me set up the website and security systems. We'd become real friends during all of this, bonding over takeout and late-night conversations about rebuilding. My first client was a former colleague from Brenner and Company who'd left when the scandal broke. Then another. Word spread quietly through the industry. She's honest. She's talented. She doesn't take credit for other people's work. Small clients at first. Local businesses, startups, people who valued integrity over flash. But they were mine. I worked hard for them because I wanted to, not because someone was standing over me demanding it. Bailey from accounting joined me part-time, happy to escape the corporate world. We worked well together, building something real. One afternoon, Daniel stopped by with coffee, looking at the modest office with approval. "It suits you," he said. "It's not fancy." "No, but it's honest." "That's better." I smiled, looking around at my small empire. "Yeah, it really is." 6 months later, I stood in my office as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Through my window I could see the city skyline. The same towers that used to feel like a prison now looked different. Distant. Just buildings. Daniel had texted asking if I wanted to grab dinner. We did that often now. Sometimes just as friends. Sometimes as something that might be becoming more. Neither of us was rushing to define it. Before I left, I took a moment to look at the framed article on my wall. Not the one with my name in the scandal. The one that came later. Local consultant testifies in major fraud case, credited with providing key evidence. It wasn't about the recognition. It was about the reminder. That I'd survived. That truth mattered. That staying silent would have cost me everything. My phone buzzed. "Daniel." "Ready." I grabbed my jacket and locked the office behind me. As I walked to meet him, I thought about that morning when he'd knocked on my door, terrified and desperate. How that single moment of trust had changed everything. "Do you ever miss it?" Daniel asked later over dinner. "The big firm, the prestige." I looked out at the city lights, thinking about the question. "No," I said softly. "I finally work somewhere that doesn't require silence to survive." He smiled. We finished our meal in comfortable quiet. Outside, the city moved on, indifferent to our small victory. But it was ours. And it was enough.